want to thank the rhythm section in the back. I appreciate the clapping back there. Don't give up. Encourage. The rest of us will catch up with that eventually. I don't know who it was, but we need leadership. We need inspiration there sometimes. It was fun this last week. I told Brad and Sharon when we met, I said, I'm on vacation. Just come up with some stuff, and I'll see if I can make it fit. So I did have this first song in mind, and it was the wrong song, but it turned out to be the right song. And then Brad came up with this song, Could You Be, and then the last one that we're going to do here. And Sharon mentioned this text randomly out of nowhere. She just said, in fact, she didn't even quote she didn't cite it, she just read it, and she said, I quote, "And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto the dry land." And I said, yeah, put that one in there. She meant it as a joke. But it works, as we'll find out. My sister, some years ago, my mother, but she's no longer with us, but my mother, when she'd been in the hospital, my sister was there taking her shift, and I had come up to meet with her and to exchange shifts with her. And a friend of hers was there. I don't remember his last name. His first name was Saeed, and he was formerly Muslim, now Christian. And he was sitting at the end in sort of the waiting area at the end of the nursing, end of that floor of the hospital. And I was asking about him, and my sister, I'll never forget, she looked at me, because my sister's very conservative, and we've talked about this in here, but we have very differing views theologically, and that's fine. We've somehow figured out how to get along, but she was trying to help me and prevent some awkwardness. And so she said, Saeed is very defensive about his faith. You two will have nothing in common. And I said, so you don't want me to talk to him? She said, well, you can go say hi, introduce yourself. Just don't talk about faith. I mean, y'all just won't have anything in common. And he's very defensive now that he's Christian, formerly Muslim. And I said, well, then we won't talk about God. And she said, well, that's going to be hard because he'll want to. And I said, well, okay, we'll see. So I went over and I said to him, so where were you from? And he mentioned he was from Pakistan. And I said, well, I didn't know Pakistan from any other country, but I knew he'd been Muslim. And I said, so you grew up there. And I said, by any chance, did your mom or our grandmother or grandfather ever tell you stories about Mullah Nasruddin Hoja? And he says, you know about Mullah Nasruddin Hoja? And I said, yeah, I love Hoja stories. He says, we call him Mullah Hoka. But I said, yeah, but in different parts of the Middle East and the Eastern world, they call him Mullah Nasruddin Hoja. And he says, yes, the wise fool. And I said, yeah, did you ever hear stories? He said, yeah, one of my favorite. And he's trying to remember it. And I said, well, I remember the one about where the Mullah was outside and he was looking for something in the bushes. And people came up to him at his little cabin there and they said, Mullah, what are you looking for? And Nasruddin said, well, I'm looking for my keys. I lost my keys. And they said, well Nasruddin, where did you lose them? And he said, well, I lost them inside. And they said, well, why are you looking for them out here? And he said, because there's more light out here. And so Saeed started to laugh, and he says, yes, I remember. Yeah, so foolish. And he said, do you remember the one, did you hear the one about Nasruddin, how he fell down the stairs, he dropped a basket of laundry, and his wife and others came out from the other room, and they said, are you all right? And he said, yes, but he was laughing and smiling. And they said, you dropped all of this clothing and laundry. Why are you laughing? And he said, I'm just so glad I wasn't wearing any of it when it fell down the stairs. And so we told one story after the other, and my sister came back after being in the hospital room, and she saw us laughing together. And she says, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're just sharing stories. And we're talking about our growing up and the stories that we heard growing up and the different shared experiences we have. And then we didn't go any further about that. But it reminded me of this important thing about life that we sometimes forget. And that is that we have more in common than we have different. But we live often by our differences. We define ourselves often by our differences. We define ourselves often by the stories we've either grown up with or the stories that we continue to tell, because as I mentioned, we're kind of creatures of habit. So we do this naturally. And so our stories this morning have something to do about what breaks into our lives that challenges our life, that challenges us to see something different. And I'm convinced that the parables have nothing to do with heaven, obviously, or what heaven would look like, more to do with what the kingdom of God, the reality of God in our midst, the presence of the sacred in the everyday, what that looks like. And so we have these parables. Sharm told 3 of them last week, all from the chapter 13 in Matthew. There's sort of a whole a collection of Jesus' discourses that were centered around just these parables. And these are the last 2, essentially. There's one more that comes at the very end, but these are essentially the last 2 of the kingdom of heaven is like this. And it's interesting because what you see with the parables is you see this tendency to disrupt things, to turn things upside down. So for Sharm, for example, the one she was talking about, there's too much leaven in this flour. You don't need this much flour, right? There's too much flour. There's enough flour in that parable to make 52 loaves of bread. You don't need that much. And yet, you could feed a whole village with that much. There's something else going on here in these parables. The parable of the scattered seed, the sower, the parable of the sower that's familiar with a lot of us. It's such a waste, right? What farmer in their rightful mind goes and scatters seed just anywhere to see what happens? But that's life. Life is mixed and confusing and diverse and unusual and familiar. And so where is the grace? Where is God in the midst of all of that? That parable is suggesting that there's something else going on here. There's some kind of extravagance, some kind of wastefulness, some kind of overabundance that we're not aware of, that these parables are suggesting. If Jesus was saying that God's kingdom is more like, well, I'll say it this way, that the kingdom of life, because we like to use that phrase, the kingdom of life, is a kingdom of justice and a kingdom of inclusion and a kingdom of co-creation. That at the very heart of life is about everyone being included, everyone being a part of this. So it's not just about the Jews and not these other Jews, or these Christians and these other Christians, or these Christians and these Muslims. It's not about our political affiliation or sexual orientation or gender or ethnicity or social economic status. There's something about at the very heart of our being that is divine, that is sacred, that is connective for all of us. And somehow, this parable suggests that if we stumble upon that, it changes everything. So what moves you? What excites you? In our parable today, the guy who gets excited, he's so excited, he goes and he sells everything to buy the field. Is there something that's ever excited you so much that you would change your whole life for it? What has that been in your life? What's really important to you, so much important to you that you give up everything to have that? Is faith important? For some, it would be faith as a matter of beliefs that are important, that you don't change your beliefs, that you don't challenge the beliefs. You find your beliefs about God, about what it is to be a Christian, that those things are all important. But what I would ask you is that, do those things actually connect you more deeply to life? Because what I think that this parable is ultimately about how life becomes interesting. When my sister said to me, you and Sahid have nothing in common, and he's going to want to defend his faith against anything you might want to say, my first reaction probably should have been, I should probably just say, hello, my name's Tom, and go check on Mom. But I'm kind of stupid this way. I kind of go, I wonder what would happen if I poke this thing. Or I wonder what would happen if I light this match near some gas. I hear an explosion, but I've never seen that. I mean, curiosity is a powerful enticement. But I've learned something over the years, that life is not about me, but about what makes life interesting, about how I can participate in a way that makes life interesting. That my life is more meaningful and more satisfying when I discover more about your life. And I'm not that great at it. I'm working at it because I'm an introvert. And so I'm happy being in my head a lot of the time. But what I find is by being present to others and by trying to find these connective moments, life becomes more interesting. And the unexpected begins to happen, begins to surface. In the story of Jonah, Jonah refuses to go to the Ninevites, right? He's not going to go to speak to the Ninevites. They're the people that his people hate. He's not going to talk to them. Why would God love them? So he ends up running. He's not going to do that. It's too dangerous. Plus, he doesn't like them. Gets on a ship, and as you know the story, he gets kicked off the ship, thrown off the ship. They cast lots. The lot falls in his favor, of course, and he gets thrown off and swallowed by a fish. And in the fish, he's praying, I guess maybe I screwed up or something. But where does he end up? He ends right back up where he started, where he tried to run, where he tried to avoid. Not because God said, you better do what you're told, but because at the very heart of who we are, no matter who we are, is this connective reality of God's grace, of God's love, of we all belong, of we're a part of something larger. And until we can come to terms with that, we find ourselves in the belly of fish all the time and in the midst of vomit, to be quite descriptive. I mean, we find ourselves in this kind of crap all the time because we run from our connectedness. We do things that we do things unconsciously that divide us from one another. But life is about, I think, the kingdom of God in terms of that life is about this openness towards what else might be here that I'm missing. Because at the heart of my understanding of God's kingdom is connectedness. And if that's at the heart of things, what am I missing? That's what it means to make life interesting. If you go to the root word and you look up interesting, it has these two root words. Inter, which means between, and then the esse in Latin, which means to be. It's this being between. What makes things interesting is what's happening between us, or between me and life itself, me and creation, me and a tree, me and a blade of grass. What makes life interesting is what I open up to allow to happen between me and this other thing. Jesus says the kingdom of God is like a man who's walking along a field and he stumbles on a treasure. So I want you to think about this idea of what this treasure might be. If it were something, wouldn't he just take it? Wouldn't he rehide it and then go back, day after day and start, using it and working off of it as a resource, as a surplus for his own life? I mean, why sell everything? The man who finds the great pearl, why sell everything to have one thing? Because the parables are not about anything in particular. They're about what changes the way we see things. The parables are all about seeing and changing how we see. So to challenge you, I want to suggest this idea that we're going to, for the next several weeks, we're going to be playing with this idea of worship. But we're going to be talking about the gospel as different narratives that we live by. The gospel is the blues. The gospel as, the band, y'all can come on up. The gospel as the blues. The gospel as soap operas. Even though I'm sure none of you have ever watched a soap opera. The gospel as musicals. The gospel is comedy. There are all sorts of sort of genre that we listen to, that we participate in, because they're stories. They're forms of stories. But they're also forms that speak out of our own story. We connect with them in certain ways. So we're going to play with that. But I want to think with you about this idea of worship. And to suggest that worship is not about adoration. If you look up the word worship, the word also has two parts, and that means to work with something. First of all, the word were means to honor or to see the worth in something, to see its worth. But the word ship actually comes from the idea of scraping, as if to shape something, as if to shape. I think I used the illustration before of the angel, of the rock that Michelangelo was dragging behind him when someone said, "What are you doing with the rock?" And he said, I'm going to go and try to free the angel that's within this rock. There is this idea of shaping one another. We find worth and we work to shape one another. This connectedness. I don't see Andrea in here, DeAndrea, but DeAndrea said I could share this, and I want to show something up here on the screen. Well, just a minute before you show it. She is. Oh, hi, DeAndrea. You mind if I share this? Yeah. DeAndrea, like a lot of us, and her daughter, this opportunity for her daughter to dance. DeAndrea has been dealing with, like some of you I know, are dealing with parents who are dealing with onset of Alzheimer's or advanced stages of Alzheimer's, and her mother is dealing with this now. And it's very challenging, as any of you who have worked with that can imagine. Working with our parents at advanced stages of aging in general, it can be very challenging. I would say this could be true of our older adult children, right? I mean, we all are dealing with something in many different ways that we find very challenging. How do we see treasure in the midst of that? I mean, the idea to even think about there's treasure somehow in the midst of this just baffles me at times. I can't see beyond where I am at the moment. But there is something about this parable that says, paying attention and looking for the ways in which God speaks to us out of the midst of life, looking for the ways out of which life itself invites interest. If we think of ourselves as artists, as authors, grist for the mill, all of it invites connective possibilities. And so DeAndrea had been texting, and we've been communicating back and forth, and she and a number of friends, just how difficult things have been and how challenging this particular week has been. And then she posted something on Facebook that was really profound. And I don't know that she felt how profound it was, but I think she did. But I even found it more profound given what we're talking about. And so if you can show the picture. Did we get the picture? Right there, yeah. So this is a picture of DeAndrea on the right and her mother on the left as they're walking out from I'm not even sure where you're walking from, DeAndrea, but at your sister's house. But she posts up there, "For years I've leaned on my mother. Today she's leaning on me." And then she says, "Love you, Mom," and took this picture. And I thought, what a profound experience, what a profound moment to share. And I know it touched everybody who read it, but I think even more so what DeAndrea discovered, and she shared as such with me, but we find ourselves sometimes in these moments looking for answers, right? How do I deal with this? How do I change this? How do I make this the way I expect it should turn out? And in reality, that's not what this parable is about. This parable is about treasure is always present, moments of connection, of making life interesting. In other words, of connecting our being to the moment. That's what interesting means. Those moments are always present that come with trust and practice and occasionally this interconnectedness we share with one another and being reminded. And we find these moments and capture them and share them. So I want to suggest to you that you practice this summer as you're traveling around this idea of noticing things, but more that you take life as grist for the mill. I'm not saying deny the pain or act like it's not real or that it's not there or that the problems aren't real. What I'm saying is the parable suggests all life is connected. All life is waiting for us to find and make those connections, to find that interest. See yourself as an artist. One last quote up here, and we'll finish up here. Muriel Spark, a 20th century artist, essayist from Britain, she wrote, "When people say that nothing happens in their lives, I believe them. But you must understand that everything happens to an artist, that time is always redeemed, nothing is lost, and wonders never cease." The way in which Bradley Whitford says it is this way. Bradley Whitford, some of you all remember, was in West Wing. He was the chief of staff, the actor who played the chief of staff. I thought this was genius. He said, "Infuse your life with action. Don't wait for it to happen. Make it happen. Make your own future. Make your own hope. Make your own love. And whatever your beliefs, honor your Creator at the heart of your being. Not by passively waiting for the grace to come down upon high, but by doing what you can do that makes grace happen now. Right now, right here on earth." Of course, the way John Wesley said, he said, "Do all the good you can do in all the places you can do, in all the times for as long as you can ever do." But I want to suggest the parable is saying, don't look for the light outside. The light isn't coming to change things. The light is inviting us to see what's already changing in our midst. Amen.